Halo is one of the most well-known and recognizable game series of all time, and that's for good reason. Iconic heroes and villains like Master Chief and the Arbiter, roaring set pieces that see us literally flying into armies of massive super weapons, or manually guiding bombs ourselves. Gameplay and moment-to-moment action, which are some of the best the FPS genre has ever seen, and multiplayer offerings like Infected and Forge that cemented Halo as one of the all-time greats. But even with all these accolades, there's one more thing about Halo that is utterly amazing, and it's something a lot of people don't even know about. Or if they do, they only have surface level knowledge of how deep it goes: the lore. You see, millions of years ago, an extremely powerful alien species known as the Precursors first made contact with the Milky Way galaxy. These beings of massive importance, while still not understood in most aspects, were thought to be gods of sorts that would travel from one galaxy to another, seeding life. And when they came to our galaxy, they created us, humanity, along with another group of aliens called the Forerunners. The Precursors themselves relied on what was called the Mantle of Responsibility, which they saw as their duty to protect and preserve life, which is why they moved around the galaxy creating so much. But as the Forerunners quickly grew in power, this mantle was transferred from the Precursors to the Forerunners, as they entrusted them to treat the galaxy with care. However, as time went on, it became more and more clear that the Forerunners would not be a good shepherd, and that rather humanity, with their focus on empathy, should be entrusted instead. This changing of the guard from the Precursors angered the Forerunners, and using their technology which they had based on Precursor artifacts, the Forerunners waged war with their god creators, showing that they weren't all powerful after all. After eventually winning this battle and besting humanity as well, the Forerunners began to build massive cities over the corpses of dead Precursors, while the remaining ones that survived escaped into deep space. But you see, the Precursors had one last trick up their sleeve. For thousands of years, under the feet of the Forerunners, the Precursor bodies decayed and transformed, molding into a fleshy goop that would eat all life around it. And with time, this birthed an entirely new consciousness and being into the universe, known as the Flood. These heinous monsters rose from the ground like undead and multiplied into millions in an instant, devouring entire planets and killing millions of Forerunners in a bloody massacre. As war raged on for years and years, it became more and more apparent that the Forerunners were fighting a losing battle, and that the Flood was the greatest threat the galaxy had ever seen. Realizing they had no other choice, a massive set of doomsday weapons were built called the Halo Rings, which when activated would purge the galaxy of all sentient life. On these rings, many captured Flood specimens were studied and entire ecosystems were built to house the Forerunners and their people. But when the time came, the rings were called upon, and in a blinding light, a majority of life was instantly vanquished. But as part of the protocol, the Forerunners also sent pods to seed the galaxy post the Halo Array initiation, and the main things they were seeding was their old rivals, humanity. This new civilization of humans, known as the Reclaimers, are the humanity we see and play as in the Halo games, and during this period, a new seeded alien civilization called the Covenant makes contact with humans as well, which eventually leads to another giant war. Spartan super soldiers like Master Chief are trained and experimented on as children and eventually become 7-foot-tall killing machines. And on the Covenant side, great warriors with swords would don their armor and slaughter on the battlefield. The Covenant themselves also worshipped ancient Forerunner technology and saw them as gods, which they aimed to please in what they called the Great Journey. Sadly though, this eventually led to the Flood being unleashed once again during the Human Covenant War, which showed both races that neither of them were the biggest threat in the galaxy. And well, that's what we mostly experience in the games, along with a lot of other story beats specific to Master Chief and his journey. But overall, for me, it's so fascinating seeing all the lore behind a series that before, I only played for the shooting as a kid. If you haven't already played Warframe, you're missing out on one of the most fast-paced third-person action multiplayer games out there right now. But also, you're missing out on some truly insane and intricate lore. Long before the events of the games took place, a human faction known as the Orokin Empire had conquered the stars. On Earth's moon Lua, they had set up a base of operations where they mastered biotechnology and gene manipulation, which allowed them to create an army of low-caste clone workers called Grineers, who were forced to obey their Orokin Orokin elite masters. With the help of these worker drones and countless humans of the lower classes, the Orokin elites expanded further and further out into the galaxy, eventually aiming to reach other star systems nearby and discovering what was to be known as the Void, a parallel dimension which pushed society forward thousands of years in an instant. And along the way, through multiple breakthroughs in technology, the Orokins developed perfection in merging organic and inorganic material alike, which led to the creation of engineered techno-infections that were parasites that could mutate and assimilate any biological or synthetic matter into a new life form entirely. Truly, the Orokin elite seemed to be unstoppable, and this power led to the mistreatment of the lower classes, with constant horrific experimentation and testing on innocent people taking place. However, one of these experiments actually led to one of the most important events in the lore, the Zeramin 10-0 incident. A massive colony ship carrying thousands of families and children was secretly forced to divert into the Void in order to try and populate a new star system for the elites. But due to heavy Void exposure and lack of understanding, the adults on board became crazed and manic and started to butcher their own children, tearing them limb from limb. The children, on their other hand, due to some unforeseen force, were able to resist the Void's full intentions and fought back against their parents to regain their sanity, and in the process also gained new Void powers that gave them the ability to smash matter and human skulls with ease. These Zeramin children were deemed to be far too dangerous by the Orokin ruling class, and were forced to be hidden away from society to be forgotten to the sands of time. The children and their new lineage would become known as Void Demons, or later Tenno, which is exactly what we play as in-game and why we're so powerful. But for a while, these Void Demons simply were stored away, with one Orokin high intellectual named Margulis helping to create them a dreamland they could help pull consciousness into, which was a cool and dark environment that kept the Void powers at bay and allowed the children to hone their power. And this event would later come to serve humanity in a great way. Because during this time, the Orokin Empire was still thirsty for conquest. Their origin star system was dying out due to massive resource extraction and empire building, and the elites knew that despite the failures of the original Zeramin colony ships, they needed to get to another star system in order to survive. So a project was devised to create a race of synthetic beings known as the Sentinels, which would shepherd the expansion of Orokin influence beyond the origin system and into new territory through massive terraforming operations. However, because of the Sentinels' ability to harness any material around them and repair their bodies through fission, they became almost impervious to any damage. And because of this power and a slow evolution to gaining their own consciousness and thought, the Sentinels eventually rebelled, leading to what was known as the Old War between the Sentinels and the Orokin. Many new technologies were developed to fight back against the Sentinels, like the Necromechs, autonomous and remote-controlled machines with heavy weaponry, or void shielding that could repel or fix pulse weaponry, but nothing proved good enough against the Sentinels, or at least that was until the development of Warframes. Through research into ancient synthetic and biological infestations that had previously wrought havoc on humanity, the Orokin developed new strains of matter-altering contagions of sorts that would transform human subjects into brutal killing machines, with only some of their memories still intact. And these warriors were put into highly advanced suits made of regenerative shields and greatly enhanced mobility tendons, along with transistors that enhanced supernatural abilities. The Tenno would eventually be the ones called upon to don these suits and transformations, and they were perfect for the job because of their years of training and supernatural void abilities. Through transference, a new technology to transfer consciousness into a host body, the Tenno would power the Warframe war machines and single-handedly turn the tide against the Sentinels. As predicted though, the war had left open a massive power vacuum and resulted in many civil wars and unrest sprouting throughout the Origin system, with even the original Grineers rising up and taking over much of Orokin society. And along with this, the Tenno were betrayed and forced into a deep slumber, as the star system fell into utter chaos with multiple factions forming. This eventually leads to the Warframe era though, the one we play in, where the Tenno are once again awoken from their dormant state, called upon to control the Great create Warframes once again to take on formidable threats, most notably the rise of the infections in the galaxy that no longer are being held at bay by the Orokin Empire. And really, Warframe has so much lore even besides this, with entire dives into how different strains of infections work and countless eras and events that see the rise and fall of new and interesting technology or ideas. It's the type of universe you could do a 3-hour video on just for itself and still you would be missing so much. But even just the gist of this world and how it started is so fascinating and really makes you want to jump in and learn more. Five Nights at Freddy's, or FNAF, is without a doubt one of the most ubiquitous game series when it comes to lore. There have been countless multi-hour-long YouTube analysis videos now, and entire communities dedicated to figuring out the secrets of this dark and twisted franchise. And all of this intrigue stems from the unbelievable murders and horrors that took place in a set of pizzerias and third places that were supposed to cater to kids. You see, years ago, a man named William Afton moved himself and his family from England into a small rural town in the States called Hurricane. And it was here that William met another family man named Henry Emily. And after becoming good friends and due to both of their entrepreneurial spirits, they decided to open up a new business venture they called Fredbear's Family Diner. This home away from home of sorts was to be known for its delicious cakes and pizza, but even more so, the cute and cuddly giant animatronics that would put on shows for young children and families alike. In fact, inside of these massive electronic animatronics were chambers that people could climb into and control themselves. And often, Henry and William, after a good day of hard work, would don these suits themselves and put on fantastic and funny shows for families. Almost similar to something like Chuck E. Cheese, if any of you know what that is. It's something that I grew up with as a kid myself and have so many distinct memories of. But you see, things at Fredbear's Diners were about to take a turn for the absolutely mental. As business began to boom, William and Henry opened up more and more locations, along with a spin-off property called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which also came with the creation of a whole new host of animatronics to cater to the younger crowd. But as William and Henry began to become more and more close, Henry started to discover something very, very wrong was going on with William. This strange man from England seemed to have multiple violent outbursts, and oftentimes would talk about extremely sadistic or horrifying things that he would potentially do to others, even children. So fearing for his only child's life, Henry designed a puppet animatronic to protect his daughter. But on one fateful evening, when she found herself locked outside one of the franchise establishments, William pulled up into the parking lot, got out of his car, and brutally mauled this helpless young child to death, all while the protector animatronic was locked away inside in a box. After this event, when the puppet animatronic finally did escape its confinements inside, it went outside to Henry's daughter's dead body and became possessed by her soul. The first instance we see in the series of the power that children and their souls have, something that will be very important later. And during this time as well, this wasn't the only instance of heinous acts on children that William had committed. At one point, he lured 5 helpless underage customers into one of the back rooms in the pizzeria and murdered them ruthlessly, de-skinning their bodies in the process. After which, he took their lifeless corpses and stuffed them into hidden compartments that he had designed into many of the animatronics, meaning the happy and carefree robots putting on shows for children every night literally had dead children inside them at the same time. But you see, this main murder spree from William was initiated after he found one of his own children dead in the jaws of one of the animatronics, due to the fact that one of his older sons had tried to play a prank on his youngest where the bear animatronic would give him a kiss, but during this, one of the springs broke and cut the small child in half, spewing blood everywhere. For someone that was already an assumed child serial killer, this event is what sent William off to the deep end, losing the one he loved most, family. And all of these horrific events eventually cascaded into the diner and pizzeria locations being shut down, as well as William himself losing his other high-paying corporate job, which caused him to go on to his newest venture, Afton Robotics, which he used as a front to kidnap children from their families and torture and kill them. Because William had discovered that whenever he killed a child, they would release a mysterious substance known as remnant, which actually gave William the power of immortality. This meant that by engaging in his favorite pastime, murdering children, William would also be granting himself an infinite life to commit more murders. And if you haven't already caught on by now, the lore in this series is absolutely and undeniably crazy. What on the surface first looked like a standard horror game with creepy robotic animatronics, over the years after countless reveals, has turned into one of the most horrific and terrifying stories full of evil world building out there. In the games, we get to explore these now haunted facilities in the small town of Hurricane and unveil more hellish stories of the events that took place, all while being chased around by creepy robots haunted by the souls of murdered children. And it goes to show that sometimes the least assuming of games are hiding the most twisted lore. And considering how massive the community and fan base of this series is now, it also sheds light on the fact that even when you make a series that is primarily focused on world building and lore, if that lore is deep and dark, it can make the game so much more beloved than even good gameplay or graphics ever could. After all, stories are a part of the human condition, and the more strange and macabre the stories, the more interesting they become, living on in our minds forever. And if you're looking for a spooky series like that, look no further than Five Nights at Freddy's. I've never really been a big fan of JRPG games or any Eastern style media for that matter. I found the way in which characters and stories are portrayed in every anime I've watched too foreign, and no matter how much I've tried, games like Final Fantasy or Persona never seem to keep me interested past 10 hours. Or at least that was until I found out about Xenoblade Chronicles, because without a doubt, it has some of the coolest lore for a video game series of all time. On Earth, at the beginning of the 21st century, a strange source of magnetic abnormal matter was discovered in the heart of Africa, and it kicked off everything that this series becomes. Upon retrieval of this unidentified artifact and with further study, the striking revelation is made that it's actually the world's first ever perpetual motion machine. Or in other words, a device that can run endlessly with no external inputs, the holy grail of engineering and physics. And on top of this, it also had capabilities to open wormholes or gateways to other dimensions, all feats that just years before seemed like science fiction. As expected, this quickly led to mass hysteria and questions as to where the device came from and for what purpose. So the United Government of Earth created a space elevator called the Beanstalk that carried the artifact into the first low orbit station above Earth's atmosphere. You see, at this time, Earth was encapsulated by 3 massive rings connected to space elevators, each forming entire cities and biomes that humanity called their home away from home. And on top of placing the artifact in these highly secured space zones, the world's resources were also pulled together to create a super intelligent AI collective known as the Trinity Processor. Gaining its own free will through multiple forms of consciousness that could speak to one another, the Trinity was in charge of guarding and managing the artifact, which was now being referred to as the Conduit. But as always happens with stories like this, things didn't quite go according to plan. A rogue faction of humanity looking to use the Conduit for their own goals tried to launch an all-out assault on the orbital space stations to gain control, and as a last-ditch effort, the Trinity Protocol initiated one of its most extreme measures. By activating the conduit itself, Trinity was able to emit a massive wave of energy that in one fell swoop destroyed the Earth, and in the process destroyed the fabric of dimensions and time itself. Almost all of the human race was destroyed in the blink of an eye, but for those that did survive, they were caught in this chaotic primordial soup and cast into different dimensions where they were forced to survive. And over thousands of years, separate societies developed and formed their own ways of life and teaching, each eventually developing into gods themselves from extensive research and experimentation. In the games, we are actually walking around and fighting on these gods, where the environments we see and engage with are nothing more than small portions of these massive human bodies who have slain each other in battle. It's one of the most insane setups for a game I've ever heard, and also the first setup that truly got me excited for JRPGs and what they have to offer. I mean, seriously, there is so much awesome lore and potential in this universe, and when you play the games, getting to learn about the ancient race of humanity and what they became is such a cool mystery. Or even learning that the actual game world you play on is human titan bodies. What a reveal. And it also lends itself to a lot of fascinating sci-fi concepts and ideas that I haven't seen in a ton of Western media, which are fun to explore in their own right. Because even if you are someone like me who tends to not enjoy JRPGs and what they have to offer, reading about a world as deep and fascinating as one like this should be up almost anyone's alley.